Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So this time we're welcoming to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, Mark Zides. Mark is the creator of several companies, author of a book about to be published on early career success, and he's worked remarkably for 3 out of the 4 Big Four consulting firms. His fields of interest and expertise are as broad-ranging as his degree from Babson College in science, finance, investments, and behavior sciences. He's calling in today from Massachusetts, where it looks as though spring is coming too. Mark, welcome.
Claire, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So let's get started. Let's talk about your own career journey. You've been through several pivots and challenges in your career, working as a founder and an employee, as a consultant in some of these Big Four firms, and with less well-known names. You've written a book, you lead your own consulting firms, in the plural. Why don't you tell us how this extraordinary career unfolded, and tell us about whether it was by design or serendipity, some of the key moments of pride and achievements, and any challenges along the way.
So that's a loaded question. I appreciate you asking. It's been a long journey, right, through my career. It's been about 30 years. And I'm still trying to figure out, I think, in my mid sort of career, it might be a pivot coming up again soon. But at the core of my experience, it's really been around wanting to help people, right? So I have this part of my DNA, which is on the more of the leadership and training and learning and mentoring and sales and relationships and communications. That's sort of where I grew up post-college, I guess. So, I could probably talk for 20 minutes about my career journey and where I pivoted and whatnot. But what I will say as I reflect back, there was no plan. It just really evolved as I went throughout my career. So when you talk about pivots or you talk about a disruption in your career, a lot of things happened, and not just mine, but other people, right? So I'll highlight 9/11 was an interesting time in 2001 when I sold my first business just before that happened. And the business didn't go to where we thought it would because of that unfortunate event. Again, went into consulting and said, you know what, it probably doesn't make the most sense to go out and hang a shingle and try to start another business at that time. And that's when I moved into Big Four consulting. And I worked at Ernst & Young, and then I worked at Monitor Group, which was then acquired by Deloitte, and then PwC. So the experience in those firms were incredible, being world-class premier firms. But my role was different. I wasn't an expert practitioner, a technical person. I was the relationship person. So I either led businesses or led sales. And then after another big event, which again, a lot of people on your podcast in the world went through, 2008, the financial crisis happened. I reflected back at that point in my career, and I said, you know what I want to do that's going to really make me happy. And I started or restarted CoreAxis, which is where I am today. Probably as I look back, it wasn't the greatest time to launch a company in the fall of 2008. And the typical story, and it's in my book, where, I sold my 401k and I said, this is really what I'm passionate about. I want to get into training and leadership and talent management. And here we are 14 years later.
Wonderful. So you took that brave decision, and no doubt the challenge of bringing that company back into action in very lean times encouraged you to be a careful curator of what you were creating. So well done. And it's wonderful to see that you're still here in it. So when we think about all the different contexts that you've worked in, and you just reflect back, what lessons do you feel you've learned in working in such different places? And maybe could you comment on what your favorite employed role was and why?
So I'll answer the second one first. Those are two good questions. So my favorite role is helping people succeed. And that comes in a lot of different contexts or a lot of different situations. But regardless of my role or my title, I don't see a hierarchy. A lot of other large companies do in an organization. The big three consulting firms I work for, they're matrix organizations. So it's very hard to navigate, within those organizations and really succeed if you don't have a strong network, or you don't have peers, or you don't have mentors. So what I'd say, if I combine the answer to your two-part question, is the part that you really need to do in your career, from my perspective, as I reflect back, is you need to have a strong network. And whether that's your peers, whether that's your boss, whether that's other people in other parts of the organization, you need to advocate for yourself. You need to be able to put yourself out there, get out of your comfort zone in the workplace, to be able to make yourself known and seen. I'm not saying you want to go toot your own horn and say, oh, I did this project, but you want to actually build relationships in the organization, do strong communication skills and strong listening skills.
Absolutely. Showing curiosity and building on it somehow. Definitely. Tell us a little bit more about the nature and challenges of moving in and out of corporate employment. I mean, obviously, some of your pivots have been made at times where circumstances dictated the change, but nevertheless, it would be really interesting to hear about the sorts of challenges and opportunity that moving backwards or forwards in these directions can bring.
I love that question, because one of my colleagues at Thermo Fisher Scientific, who's the head of global talent management, he and I joke all the time. We call it get in, stay in. And we actually have a URL called Get In, Stay In. And I was going to write a book about it or do a podcast, but that's for another time. And it's similar to the question you asked, because when you go inside of a company, a large company, that's a certain mindset, it's a certain pursuit, a certain way to go about that, right? You have to brand yourself in a certain way. And in order to do that, you have to be able to tell stories. You have to be able to inform the hiring manager or the leaders in that organization. Why should they bring you in? What makes you different? Hey, you know what? You're an entrepreneur. You wouldn't fit in a big four consulting firm. We need somebody from university, and we need someone who's got their MBA or their PhD. And you have to be able to, like I said, brand yourself in a way and let them know that if I come in, here's the impact I can make. It doesn't have anything to do with my credentials or a piece of paper. Here's what I did at my own company, or here's what I did as a consultant, whether it's an ROI story, whether it's a supply chain story, whatever story it is. And if you can build trust and build your own brand in that way, your resume just gets you into the door. Then it becomes just like any other relationship building, strong communication skills, listening skills, asking the right questions, but then being able to package yourself in a way that company's going to say, wow, this person can make an impact.
I'd be tempted to probe a little bit and say, okay, storytelling is always going to create a connection, an impact, an ongoing relationship. Tell me about what it felt like to leave the corporate environment each time, and what sort of things you missed and what sort of opportunities you found or refound in the art of being and the life of being self-employed and building your own business.
When you leave corporate environment, you're leaving structure. You're now taking on more risk. In a large organization, you have all these resources. You have all these people, smarter people than you, that can help you get work done. And you're all part of a larger culture, a larger organization. And there's a lot of benefit to that. And if you want to build your career in a large organization, there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of ways to succeed within an organization, whether it's you stay in the same function and you do it for 25 years, which, as you know, is very rare these days. I would tell a young person in career to, move around that organization, right? Go from one part of the organization to another. Start in marketing, maybe when you're out of college. And then if you've done that for a couple of years, instead of jumping to another organization, see if you can go work in finance, see if you can go work in supply chain, see if you can go work in another part, R&D, another part of the organization, assuming the organization is large. All that said, now when you go out on your own, and you hang a shingle, as you say, in the gig economy or be a freelancer, you're on your own, right? You need to be able to work differently, work more creatively. There needs to be more of a sense of urgency when you're on your own, because the work's not coming to you as if you're in an organization. You have to go find the work. That's the biggest difference, because you have to put food on the table. So you have to actually go out and sell and go out and be resourceful.
Is there anything at all that would take you back into a corporate role these days?
I would do it because I feel like I have this sage advice or this experience now throughout my career. I frankly think that I'm not sure one of those companies would hire me because I think if those companies, and I'm talking big brands, I'm talking large companies, if they're smart, they're going to want to promote their high potentials and their internal people that are stars. Why would you bring in somebody, a Gen Xer like me, who's sort of done it all? And again, I think I can make an impact if somebody wanted to bring me in to lead a team or be part of an organization. But I would say for those companies, if I were talking with a CEO or head of global talent, which we do all the time, I would let them know, you know what, you should hire the younger version of Mark Zides, right? Somebody who's already in your organization that knows the people and is trusted and liked and understands it can take your company forward.
Absolutely. Good call. You mentioned this idea of advising early career professionals to be really varied and curious in their approach and go and do different things within one company or several for that matter. What other advice would you give before we get on specifically to, all the wonderful stuff that's in your book? But if you had, a 21-year-old about to graduate, friend of the family in your home, what would you want to tell him over a cup of coffee or over lunch?
I have 3 Gen Zs myself. My youngest daughter is still in high school, so I don't know if she made the cutoff, but I would just tell, just like I tell my own kids who are, one's graduating college this year and another one's a sophomore in college, take chances, stretch your curiosity. Like you've said, put yourself out there. Don't take the role or the job that you think is going to be boring or it's not going to be developmental for you. If there's an opportunity to take that stretch assignment, if you get into an organization or if you can actually, learn from experience. And again, I know that sounds cliche, but it's okay to make mistakes. I think that a lot of these young professionals are wired in a way where they're so structured and they don't want to make a mistake or they don't want to fall down because they've been so protected through growing up. When you get into the workforce, it's okay to be wrong as long as you learn from it. So that would be the one piece of advice I would say is do whatever you need to do to get that job. Make sure your values and what you want match the company that you're actually applying to. And when you get in there, be a trailblazer, right? Use your curiosity, use your technology skills, use your communication style to make an impact in that organization.
Wonderful. I'll look forward to hearing how your children do as they go through that. Let's get on to the book, The PACE Process. Tell us a little bit about what your motivation was to write it, the sort of needs that you believe you're addressing with the book, and tell us, if you will, and forgive the pun, about the process that you used for writing it.
So the book was really something that I've wanted to do my entire career. And I feel that, as we've discussed, I have a lot of interesting experience from the past 30 years of my career. And I come at it from 3 perspectives, or understanding 3 perspectives and 3 lenses, right? So I have the Gen Zs and the young Gen Ys that are in the workforce, and they'll make up 50% of the workforce by 2025. I understand their perspective because I have children that age. Then I'm a parent of those children. Then CoreAxis, and for the most part, for the last 12, 13 years, we work with brands like Bank of America, Amazon, Thermo Fisher, and we hear from heads of HR and these organizations that do onboarding and new hire, what they're looking for in these young professionals. I can sit there in the middle and be a coach and say, okay, young professionals, we're hearing you're not ready for the workforce. We're hearing from the new hire managers that you come in not prepared, and it's tough love. So I sat here and wrote this book saying, okay, these individuals need some coaching because it's different now. It's harder now. And one example is we used to interview face-to-face and shake someone's hand. Now a lot of the interviews are through Zoom. So how do you build that connection? How do you differentiate yourself from other candidates to get into these companies? And then once you get into a company, what are some of the tactics and things you need to do to make sure you outshine and differentiate yourself from your peers? So the PACE process, the word PACE to me has always meant a bunch of different things. So keep the pace, slow down the pace, maintain the pace, slow down the pace. So for every individual, it means something different, right? For me, I'm hopefully slowing down my pace because I'm furthering my career, and I just want to give back at this point. If someone's early in their career and they're not moving fast enough, well, maybe you have to pick up the pace. Maybe you have to maintain the pace. So PACE stands for an acronym, just like anything else in the process. So I turned the word I really liked into an acronym, which is prepare, apply, commit, and evaluate. And, we can certainly go into that, but the book explains what each letter means as you go through parts early in your career.
Wonderful. I love the idea of varying pace as well. It's so crucial, even within a given stage, I believe, of a career, to know when to turn the heat up and when to turn it down, and to be conscious of what's going on around us. I mean, let's go a little bit into the model. Obviously, you don't want to give everything away, otherwise no one will buy your book, and we certainly wouldn't want that. But if we think about, some of the things, some of the areas where you're giving advice and guidance, they seem to range from everything from work-life balance to emotional intelligence. You've got this model for planning, applying for, committing, and exploring in an early career. If you were to boil down the 2 or 3 main ideas of the book, what would they be?
Again, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, which I'm enjoying very much. Thank you. I feel that people early in their career need to build their brand. They need to make sure that they're building their network. And when you do that and you get into an organization, it's hard because a lot of work now and the future of work is hybrid. So to build those personal connections can be more challenging. And I recognize that. So there's some tips and tricks in the book. But that would be one thing, is always advocate for yourself. Always find a way to demonstrate that you're adding value. I don't want to say you need to go out there and toot your own horn, throughout an organization, but ask for that stretch assignment. Say to somebody on your team or in your network, is there something else that I can do for you? Make your colleagues and your manager look good, right? And again, it feels like it's easy, but to do that, you have to actually do the extra work. You have to put yourself out there. So that's the one thing. And that's a little old schoolish. Now I feel like with technology, you can kind of hide behind email, and you can kind of, virtual work. You don't have to necessarily put in that 8-hour day. It frustrates some managers. I know that because they tell me that. So what can you do to debunk that stereotype of, maybe not always having your head in the game? And then the second, most important piece of it, I would say, early in your career, it's okay to, I love the word you use, Claire, pivot. It's okay to pivot, but don't jump to another company right away. Meaning, if a lot of the mentality nowadays is, hey, I'm going to work at a company for a year and then I'm going to go on to the next one because they're going to compensate me 10% more. Find out if you can stay within the same company and do different things or take on different roles. That's part of that reflection, of that evaluate, to say, before I jump ship, is there another opportunity? And that's, again, goes back to communication and advocating for yourself to try to understand, where else can I make an impact in this organization?
You've alluded to tough love. You're a parent of Gen Zs. I'm a parent of Gen Zs. Many of our listeners are parents of Gen Zs and millennials. We all have our own vision of what tough love means in different contexts. Tell us a little bit more about why you felt this particular approach was needed so much with your audience in mind.
I feel that our, again, generation of children have been overly protected. And that's on us. That's on me, right? I mean, I'm guilty as charged. They had structured play dates when they grew up, and they weren't given the opportunity to fail. And that may upset some people, but if you really were objective and you took a step back, you said, you know what? We wanted to protect our children. And if now you're taking that experience that they didn't have around failure and learning from failure because we protected them, now cascade that into the workforce. They don't actually take the chances that they may have if, when you and I grew up, we failed. We fell off our bike and, we still went out to the playground. We didn't come home and mommy and daddy didn't protect us. It's probably a bad example, but so now in the workforce, the mindset of a lot of these young professionals is they're not risk takers. They're not willing to step out of their comfort zone because they just have this shell around them. And if they didn't learn how to fail when they were younger, they're not willing to maybe fail when they're in the workplace. So they're more protective in the way that maybe they communicate. And then add on that to that technology allows them to sort of shelter themselves. So a difficult conversation that you and I may have had to have early in our careers, face to face, it's difficult. It's not easy. Now these young professionals can come and just do it over their phone, do text. So they don't have to have that face-to-face difficult conversation. And in the workplace, in order to get things done, you need to have those conversations. You can't just hide behind an email or text. And that's the way they grew up. It's not their fault. It's not, right? But that's actually, a couple of examples I can give that, needs to change in the workforce for them to be successful.
I love that. It also made me smile wryly because 2 of my 4 children went to French National Ballet School. And I tell you what, they were allowed to fail every single day. And they were told about it. And they still had to get up and smile nicely and bow at the end of the class. But yes, most children have been wrapped up in cotton wool, simply having a little private cackle in the background thinking, yep, most of them were, mine weren't. But no doubt I contributed probably in overcompensation in the other way, knowing that they were being put through their paces by mean teachers, but they got what they wanted. That's another story. Let's go back to you when you were 18 years or so old. What advice would you give to 18-year-old Mark if you could go back and help him out?
Like you said earlier, it's very contextual, depending on situations or where you were. But if I look at it holistically, I would say, try to be more global, try to be more open to other cultures. And what I mean by that is I wish I could have traveled more, right? I wish I could have gone abroad. I was sheltered in a way in a small little town, playing a couple sports with blue collar parents. And I didn't get outside of that little bubble. So I didn't know how global the world was, right? But then when I went to Babson, that was a very humbling and interesting experience because it was international school and it was all business oriented, right? So you started to learn some of those skills that you needed to. And I was brought up again with a lot of tough love. It's like, if I messed up, I knew I messed up, right?
You knew. Yeah.
So I would say, if I had the opportunity to kind of learn more about different cultures and different people growing up in a small Massachusetts town, that's something that I wish I had the opportunity to do, when I was 18 years old.
Wonderful. That's great. Let's talk about organizations. You have many very impressive household name companies as clients. What would you like to see organizations doing better when it comes to talent and career management? And can you cite any particularly great examples of companies that are doing well in this respect?
It's a great question. We could probably have a whole podcast on that.
Oh, yeah.
I think some of the larger brands are doing a very good job in attracting talent. Like, for example, Apple or Google giving unlimited vacation time. They're providing these benefits and these additional values for incoming students or incoming workers to feel valued and feel wanted there, right? So I think some of them are being pretty progressive and they're doing things a little bit differently than maybe other traditional company like a bank, that's very structured and have a strong hierarchy. So I think that, this whole great resignation, great recession thing over the last couple of years has opened the eyes of a lot of these talent management leaders and CHROs. And I would say you need to actually help not only build your internal talent from a rotational perspective to keep those people, but then you need to find or identify what the most important roles are and then figure out where those up and coming people are. You got to build better recruiting, teams, go after the right colleges. If you want engineers, you should recruit at the engineering schools, right? Don't just put everything out on social media or social marketing or a platform to say, we have these openings. Like, do some more targeted recruiting, I would say. But in general, it's a hard question to answer in a couple of minutes, just because I feel like a lot of it's so industry specific. And there's just a lot of market dynamics and a lot of economies that are going on to kind of paint a broad brush across all these different companies and industries.
And actually, when it boils down to it, it's one relationship at a time, isn't it?
It is.
However mechanized, however AI driven we're being, in the end, it's people coming to work with people and it's individuals coming to work with individuals.
Correct.
If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the world of work, what would it be?
That's a really good question. I would say enabling everyone to see their career path or their career trajectory. If there was a blueprint for success, and again, it's hard to map it out 10 years from now, right? But if a company could say, hey, Claire, here's a roadmap. It's not going to be a straight line. There's going to be a journey. There's going to be some, but if somebody knew, an individual knew that, hey, if I stayed at this company for 5 years, here's what could happen. Sort of, again, I'll call it a blueprint. I'll call it a roadmap where an individual can say, if I do these things the next 5 years, here's what I could become. And I'm a visual person, so I'd want to see it in some three-dimensional, kind of online thing where, okay, if I went this way, if I took this rotation, okay, I'm not going to get promoted in 6 months because that doesn't happen. I have to be realistic, but 18 months, I can see myself getting a promotion. And here's what it means to me financially. I think if there was some sort of predictor or some sort of tool that would enable someone to kind of see what their path or their future could be, I think that would be great. It's
a wonderful idea. And I can remember wanting exactly that when I joined LVMH 30 years ago out of business school. They told me, well, we'll have a career plan for you. And I had this thing in my mind that, it was going to look like that. And of course, the reality was they didn't have a career plan in mind for me at all. But they seduced me on that particular angle and certainly exactly that kind of thing. Isn't there a map? Isn't there something that says, not a bit of it, but actually Antoine, when he was there a few years later, he improved things on that front. But it's a great thing to aspire to. One can imagine maybe even a little game whereby, you take this decision and it might go to that and so on. Wonderful. Maybe that's your next project, Mark.
It's a good idea. Maybe I'll speak to my developer this afternoon and see if we can come up with something.
All right. Sounds great. Mark, we could obviously go on talking all afternoon, but we won't because we need to respect each other's time. It's been really very interesting having you on today. I had imagined that what we would be talking about would be very much restricted to a young audience. I'm seeing that there's much in terms of richness of your experience and your wisdom that is a good wake-up call for all of us. And if we're not listening to your answers as young people, then we certainly are listening to them as the older people who employ them or who motivate them or who raise them or inspire them. And that makes what you do and what you think about universally interesting. So thank you so much for gracing us with your presence.
Thanks for having me, Claire. I really enjoyed our conversation.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.